Nobody knows the trouble I've seen. Nobody knows my sorrow.
Welcome back to Rod's Radios. It's been about 2 months since the last episode on the Philips radio, and the reason for this is manifold. First of all, I got a bit lazy in the meantime and didn't pay much attention to it. But secondly, I got this in the background here. This is a Bush model BS35. An old colleague from my school days brought it over to me and asked me would I have a look at it. And I hadn't made a video on the repair of it because initially it looked like a straightforward job, but actually it turned out to be a lot more complicated. The problem was there was no sound coming out of it at all. It was dead. And on measurement, it turned out there was no B plus or HT voltage coming out of the transformer, which resulted in the fact that the transformer was actually open circuit on one of the secondary windings. Now, it was impossible to get a transformer for this radio because it's slightly different from the normal ones I come across, in that the windings for the heater was in a chain. In other words, all the heaters of the valves were connected together, and then there was a tap on the transformer to give 6.3 volts for the dial drive bulbs. So the chances of getting a transformer for this were absolutely nil. So I decided instead to tag on a second transformer. I had a transformer out in the workshop which would provide the B plus side of the voltage required. So I did that and things started to work again, and it looked pretty promising, and I was testing it over a series of days when I noticed the transformer was actually getting quite hot. And it didn't make much sense because the radio sounded okay. So I did a few measurements and discovered that the new transformer I put in was drawing about 100 milliamps at 290 volts AC coming out of the transformer. So that wasn't right, because I would have expected it to be at least half of that for the whole radio, including the valve heater chain. So I was thinking a little bit about what I should do about it and what was causing this problem. And I tried changing some of the parts. I'd already done a recap, by the way, on this. All the capacitors had been replaced, so it was nothing to do with that. And the only thing I could think of was that the audio output valve was possibly drawing far too much current. So the only way around it was, in actual fact, to dispose of the audio output valve stage completely and put in a little transistorized or an IC module into it, which would amplify the signal coming out of the previous stage. And this is what I've done. So I just wanted to fill you in on this, that took my attention away from the main event, which of course is the Philips radio, which is what this video is all about. But secondly, I hit a brick wall with the Philips, and actually I hit a brick wall literally and figuratively, because in the meantime I managed to reverse my car into the garage because my foot slipped off the brake onto the throttle and the car shot back. So I did a bit of damage to the car, but nothing to myself, thank goodness. So that's been fixed in the meantime, but all these things took a little bit of time. So that's why there's been a gap between the last episode. But as well as literally hitting a brick wall, I figuratively hit a brick wall with the Philips radio. And I'll come on to that in a minute. But let's have a look at the radio in the meantime to see what I was doing, because I did fix a certain amount of things that had been plaguing me. Let's go out to the workshop. Just before I go out to the workshop, here's a glance of what I've been doing. I have been doing a little bit of work on the cabinet in the meantime, and it's come up pretty well. It was pretty grubby when I got this radio initially, so I disassembled all the bits of the cabinet, took out all the brackets and the logos and everything, and cleaned up the grill first of all, which came up beautifully by using the old trick of the shaving foam, which cleans it up nicely. This was out in the garden with the shaving foam sitting on it for about a half an hour and then hosed off with the garden hose. The logos were cleaned up. This little logo on the top, which says biamply, even though the radio is not a true biamply radio. And the Philips logo here down on the bottom, if I can see, here we are, was straightened out somewhat and cleaned up. The rest of the radio got a cleaning operation too. There was no question that this radio was ever going to be stripped because there's a really high gloss finish on it already, and I didn't want to destroy that. There are still a few little marks here and there, but overall the cabinet is really nice. So hopefully, if I ever get the chassis working correctly, the cabinet is now ready to take it back in. We're out in the workshop now, and I can report on what progress I've made on the chassis. At the end of the last episode, I still wasn't happy with the dial drive, in that on the AM bands selected, the FM dial pointer was being dragged along in tandem, no matter what I tried. However, in the meantime, I got a suggestion from Manuel Caldera, who hosts the Electronics Old and New channel on YouTube. He said, why not try shrink wrap sleeving on the rubber pulley? And that's exactly what I've done. This is the shrink wrap I used. I hope you can see that there. And it just slotted on over the pulley. Here's the result anyway. As before, on the FM pointer, when I adjusted, it moved independently, which was fine. But now, with any of the AM buttons selected, the AM pointer now moves independently without dragging the FM pointer. An excellent result. Thank you, Manuel. Other than this, I've disconnected the HT smoothing capacitor and checked it out as working fully spec'd, so no need to change that. The volume control was removed also with great difficulty and disassembled because of the scratchy action. However, as much cleaning and as much lubrication as I did to the track and the contacts, it remained scratchy. And when I reinstalled it, you can hear that's still there. However, because it's a special type of volume control with 2 taps along the track, it isn't possible to get a new replacement for this. However, other than that, it's actually working okay in that it turns the volume up and down all right, smoothly. While I was doing the recapping on this radio, I noticed a strange thing happening. One of the capacitors is this 0.47 microfarad waxy paper capacitor. And it's fixed up actually in the cabinet itself in between the 2 loudspeakers. And what it does is it filters off the high frequencies from the signal that would be fed to the main speaker and directs it towards the so-called mid-range stroke tweeter speaker. And because I didn't have a 0.47 to hand, I tandemed together 2 0.22s, which give you more or less the same value, and connected it up. However, when I went to play it, I listened carefully, and there was no sound coming out of the secondary speaker at all, which just didn't make sense. So I took the capacitors out again and just by chance measured them on a little capacitance meter. Open circuit. And how could that be possible that you'd get 2 capacitors open circuit together? Surely you'd get some sort of capacitance measurement on it. And I had to scratch my head and think what was going on. And I went to the capacitor box and checked through the other capacitors that I'd bought at the same time. I purchased 10 of these. These are Chinese capacitors, all 0.22 microfarads. And each one of them was open circuit, or else the capacitor was only a fraction of what it should have measured. Unbelievable. A whole batch of capacitors bought faulty. And just to make sure I wasn't kidding myself, I since bought some more of the same value, and they work absolutely perfectly. So the moral is, check your Chinese capacitors each time before you install them into your repair jobs. Don't trust them. I can't anymore anyway. It's quite extraordinary. I mentioned earlier that I'd hit a brick wall with this radio, and so it came to pass. I thought I had everything sorted. The AM section was working perfectly, great reception, sounded good. The FM, pretty good too. But then, when I was soak testing it, suddenly the FM sound not quite disappeared, but certainly went down to a very much lower level. And I started poking around initially by checking voltages here on the FM module. And as soon as I touched the HT going in, the sound shot back up again. So that was kind of puzzling. And then I left it for a while. It sounded fine. I was getting full signal here, as you can see here on the Magic Eye, as it is at the moment. But after a while, the signal would suddenly drop and the Magic Eye level would go down. So I started messing about. First of all, I changed the valve, the ECC83, and it made absolutely no difference. Sorry, ECC85, this is the FM valve. So then I started wiggling it around, and now you can see as I do this, do you see the way the signal drops down and the sound drops down as I wiggle the valve around? Now it's come back up again. And this is what was happening, except it was doing this on its own without me touching it. So the only thing I can think is that the valve base is dodgy. There's something wrong with the connection, either underneath. It could be a dry joint on the valve base, or it could be the valve base itself that is acting up. So now the only thing I can think of is getting at the valve itself, or the valve base I should say. Now I did something in the meantime. I made this little adapter out of the bottom of an old valve that I cut up, and a new valve base on top, and wired all the pins together between the lower level and the upper level so that I could monitor the voltages on the valve as I tested it. But I found that this just didn't work at all. A VHF tuner obviously doesn't like its tube being extended out in this nature. There's nothing wrong with the connections here, by the way. They're all A-OK, but it just was completely dead. So that wasn't going to work. So now I'm thinking the only way is to actually extract the whole FM module itself, take it apart, which is horrendous, and see what I can do about the valve base, or if there's something wrong. Other than that, I'm not looking forward to this, because FM tuners are notoriously for being so fussy about location of components, length of wire, etc. coming out from each of the components. And if I mess this up, I may end up with no FM at all. So I'm going to have a little think about this. I'm probably going to have to end up doing it because I don't want to leave it as it is. But this is going to be a bit of a struggle, I can see. So stand by and let's see what happens. Well, stand by a little longer, please, because in the meantime, the weather forecast for tomorrow tells me that it's going to be 28 degrees centigrade here in Ireland, which is unnaturally warm weather even for this time of year. So it's off to the beach with me tomorrow. However, I will be back, and at that stage, hopefully I'll tackle the FM tuner. In the meantime, if you have been, thanks for watching.